Ladies and gentlemen, we are tapping in during the NFL draft week. We're a couple days removed from the NFL draft, and you see it. We're not here by ourselves today, man. We got a special guest. You might have seen him on Bleacher Report representing your New York Football Giants. And we're here talking with my guy, Awthentik, man. Awthentik, how you doing, my brother?
Doing good, man. Glad to be here. This is the season. They say tis the season, but I'm definitely not talking about Christmas. But a couple of days out from the draft, Giants got 5 picks in the top 105. Things are looking up, man. There's a lot of options here at pick 3, so I'm definitely excited, man. The lead up was great. Now we're about to get there. It's going to be a little bit bittersweet to see some of my prospects fall off the board and whatnot. But yeah, I'm hyped to get to the draft on Thursday.
100%. I'm just really excited to get some answers already, man. And as you see, I mean, we're a couple days removed. You're going to hear all different reports coming out left and right about where the Giants are going to go, who they're interested in. The smoke is definitely smoking up the room right now. But man, I'm looking to have a dope time talking about the NFL draft this upcoming Thursday. You've been covering it a lot, so I'm excited to hear your insight. And let's jump straight into it, man. You let me know who the Giants are taking at the number 3 overall pick.
Whew, that's a short question, but it is kind of a loaded question because, like, if it's up to me, I'm going to pass on the quarterback there at 3. I'm not going to draft Shador Sanders. I'm going to go with the quote unquote generational talent there, especially if it's Travis Hunter. To me, that's the best player in the draft of any position. Versatile tool. I would love to have him on our team, but all the reports that we've been hearing, coming out of all the draft experts and the analysts and anybody that's dropping rumors, is that the Cleveland Browns are going to select Travis Hunter. So that leaves us with Abdul Carter. I know quarterback is a very needy position for the New York Giants, and anybody that's familiar with what I do, I've been, I'll say, mislabeled as a Daniel Jones hater during that tenure, right? But I'm just a very critical fan, and if I see something and I think I need to speak on it, I will. I'm not trying to be a mascot for the Giants. So in this case here, I know that there's urgency to get the quarterback. First round, I just think it's going to be very tough to pass up on Abdul Carter, that type of talent. We already been in this situation before back in 2021 when we had pick 11. They passed up on Michael Parsons. Everybody wanted to trade back then, and we saw how that ended up going. We end up with Kadarius Toney. We pass on Michael Parsons. A bunch of other players were on the board there too. I want to say Rashawn Slater was on the board. And, just overthinking the pick had the New York Giants put us in a terrible position. So for me, I'm cool with going to Abdul Carter there. A lot of people want to go Shador Sanders. I got a second-round grade on him along with a lot of the other quarterbacks, so I wouldn't select him there. But I think we're in a good position. Even if they do reach and go with a quarterback there, pick 3, I don't think it's the end of the world. We got some options here. It could be Abdul Carter, could be Travis Hunter, could be Shador Sanders. Who knows?
That's a fact. And listen, I'm gonna have to stop you on your little exit on that part. You have a round 2 grade of Shador Sanders. Let's take it back a little bit when the Giants had the number 1 overall pick. And it's funny how things turn around at that current time when the Giants had the number 1 overall pick. The talk was Shador Sanders at 1. It wasn't even necessarily Cam Ward. It was a toss up between 2, but Shador Sanders was kind of, storming the headlines. What do you think kind of degrades him a little bit heading into the draft? And where do you stand on Shador Sanders as a prospect? I know you have him as a round 2 grade, but man, there's a lot of people that's clamoring for him to be the savior of the New York Giants. I think it's a very interesting topic and probably a super polarizing prospect heading into the draft. Where do you stand on Shador?
Yeah, so Shador does a lot of things well. And I do think that of all the quarterbacks in his class, the consistency is there with Shador's game. For me, it's just the type of throws, is what he was asked to do at Colorado. A lot of stuff at the line of scrimmage, a lot of stuff 9 yards or less. In fact, if you tabulate his throws that were at the line of scrimmage and 9 yards or less, you're talking about 75% of his completions being 9 yards or less. I don't see some of the advanced NFL stuff that you see down the field on an intermediate level. Some of the backside digs, some of those things. Those are some of the little beefs I have with his game. Now, I do think that Shador's a guy that can lead an offense very well. He has those leadership qualities. He gets the ball out of his hands fairly quickly. There are just a couple of knocks for me. One, and I do see him working on it, and I do think that these are guys that are, you have to go into the draft process and understand that this is the canvas and this is the foundation of where these players are at.
Yep.
And you have to have a little bit of intuition to kind of think where these guys are going to end up being and what will they develop into. And when I look at Shador Sanders, I look at him as a quarterback that even if you could get to the ceiling of what I envision, I'm not trying to cap what these players are going to necessarily do, but I'm just trying to come to an assessment here. And when I see what he could become, I honestly think it could be something like a CJ Stroud. Like that's the kind of quarterback I could see. But the type of characteristics that I like in a quarterback are the ones that are going to be knocking on that door of elite. Being that we went through 6 years of Daniel Jones, and he was a polarizing figure in his own right that really shouldn't have been, if you think about it. But there was like a gripe in the fan base where, if you were critical of that guy, it was a problem. And now that that's out the door, you're kind of starting to see that kind of lean into the Shedeur Sanders thing. There are people that are so pro Shedeur Sanders right now that you almost can't say anything critical about his game. But just to kind of stick to the point here, for me, some of the things that I've noticed on the tape, and I've looked at every game of his all 22 from 2024, some from 2023, but I've gone over the 2024 games twice. I see a guy that drifts in the pocket a lot. I see a guy that can literally walk into sacks, but you have to understand that he played behind one of the worst offensive lines we've ever seen, to be honest. And at times I noticed that he almost would lean his drop back towards the left to kind of avoid what was happening with his right tackle. No tight end in that system, so those are the things that, there's not going to be that extra guy in protection for a guy like Shedeur Sanders. I think the drop back can also be a little bit crooked at times. The arm velocity is not wowing to me, right? Even when you see him, the deep ball statistics for Shedeur Sanders are pretty good statistics, at the top of this class for sure. But all too often, and this is why I like Travis Hunter so much, you see a guy like Travis Hunter bailing him out on a deep shot, going up over two guys. There's an all-22 compilation going around on Twitter that I've seen, and the first throw on it, Shedeur throws the ball into triple coverage. You see Travis Hunter go up there and just literally make a catch that you're not going to see a lot of wide receivers make. I think the anticipation that people have been talking about going into the draft, too, is a little bit of inexperience. Like, people are just not looking at the tape, and they're just going with some of the narratives. The pro-style offense. Well, if it's a pro-style offense and we think that that's going to translate to the NFL, then why are there so many screens designed within that offense? Likely because they didn't have a running game. Likely because the offensive line was poor. But for me, I never wavered. I've been high on Cam Ward since he got to Washington State. One of my homies had put me on to him early on in the process when he was transferring over there. I was a fan of Cam Ward entering last year's draft. And when people were saying Cam Ward's going to be a fifth-round quarterback, I was like, well, sign me up. I'm a guy that looks at the intangibles, and I balance that with some of the tape. A lot of people are hanging their hats on the completion percentage with Shedeur Sanders, and that's great. Like I said, he does do a lot of things well. But for me, when you look at the last year's draft class and you look at a guy like Michael Penix, who I would have chose at 6, can we sit here and say that Shedeur Sanders is in that same ballpark? In my opinion, I can't say that's the case. So, early throughout the process, and even when I was finished the process, I've had Shedeur Sanders as a guy that should be like, fringe first round going into the second round.
Listen, I think everything you just spoke on, man, is really insightful, and truly we have to really look at it for what it is. I think when you look at it, I think we've been so hungry for the next guy, like we were speaking on early on. I think seeing a couple years of Daniel Jones and seeing how it played out with Daniel Jones leaves them to where we need to draft a quarterback. But the elephant in the room is that they went out and they signed Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston. I mean, they didn't have to sign both of those quarterbacks onto this roster. I still wouldn't be surprised if they took a quarterback, but I really feel like they put themselves in a position where they're not necessarily going to take a quarterback early on. Not to look at the past too much, but you spoke on it just now. You would have taken Michael Penix with the number 6 overall pick. Do you feel like with that happening last year where they took Malik Neighbors, the talented wide receiver, and I think Malik Neighbors is, a really good wide receiver, but people are going to argue that doesn't bring you wins. That's the biggest argument that you're seeing right now when it comes to taking a quarterback with this number 3 overall pick or taking an Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter. They're not bringing you wins. Where do you stand on that? And how do you think the Giants can still build a thorough process of a roster shading away from a quarterback with the first pick?
Yeah, and I'm okay with that plan because I like to just break things down and use my common sense and use logic when breaking down a situation. They brought in Russell Wilson, but yet you still hear a lot of people saying, well, who's going to throw him the ball and like all these different things when it comes to the quarterback position. I'm not sitting up here telling you Russell Wilson is going to be the same guy that he was during, his elite days when he was, pushing for Super Bowls and whatnot. Yep. But at the end of the day, that is what Joe Schoen told us, right, at the press conference. And if you look at the history of Joe Schoen in press conferences, within press conferences, what he normally says he's going to do or what he is insinuating that he is going to do, he likely ends up doing that. If you look at last year's draft, Joe Schoen came into free agency. He said, we are going to sign a free agent quarterback for sure. That's what he said. He said, we're going to, I'm paraphrasing here, but he pretty much said that if the right player at the quarterback position is there, we'll take him. But we feel confident going into the year with the quarterbacks we have in this room. Now, that was an egregious mistake with Daniel Jones and with Drew Lock, obviously, and Tommy DeVito. But that was just the overconfidence in Daniel Jones. You paid the guy the $40 million a year We didn't have to question if Joe Shane or the New York Giants organization had faith in Daniel Jones. We knew that by the kind of paycheck that they gave him, right? So going into the year for me, I looked at Michael Penix, and I'm a guy that's been like calling for Daniel Jones to be benched for about 3-4 years. That's where I was at with it. After 2021 and the Kenny Galladay experiment there not working out, you put the weapons around him, it didn't work. I would have moved on after the 2022 season, even with the playoff win.
Yeah.
But when you're looking at a quarterback, right? Everyone says that. They said the same thing about Saquon Barkley, right? Like, we weren't winning games with him. So, like, what does that mean, right? Does that mean that we have to get rid of all the good players on this team simply because you weren't winning games with them? Well, that would mean getting rid of Andrew Thomas. That would mean getting rid of Brian Burns came here. We paid him $28 million a year and we won 3 games. Does that mean get rid of him? Does it mean get rid of Dexter Lawrence? My philosophy is put the best players, get the best personnel in the building so that a coach who I think is capable in Brian Dable can actually excel. To me, there just seems to be a bit of a disconnect between the front office, the general manager, and it's crazy because Joe Shane came from Buffalo along with Brian Dable. But when you look at the personnel mismatches and the guys that they have drafted, even bringing in a guy like Brian Burns post, draft last year, was he truly a fit for the Shane Bowen scheme? I don't think so. When you look at Isaiah Simmons, a guy that they look at as a Swiss Army knife, can barely get on the field. Jalen Hyatt, another guy who they traded up in the 3rd round to go out there and draft, don't fit what Brian Dable really wants to do because they don't have the dogs up front and they don't have the quarterback. So for me, I don't truly look for one player to move the needle that much. Now, if we're going to get a player to move the needle, it's likely going to be at the quarterback position because we know that the quarterback position can affect the game that much. A wide receiver is dependent on the quarterback. A running back is semi-dependent on his offensive line. A defense, it doesn't matter what you do up front on that defensive line, the offense has to go out there and score points. At 16.1 points per game, you're not going to win a lot of games. If you look at the teams that are picking top 3 right now, they have a lot in common. All of them were 3-13 at the end of the season, and all of them did not score a lot of points. The Browns were the team, I believe, that scored the most points out of the top 3, and they were just barely at 20 points a game. Yeah. So for me, you got to score. That's the name of the game, especially in the modern day NFL. And I think all too often fans are looking for one player to move the needle where it's a process. And I think that Joe Shane didn't give himself the best head start in the first 2 drafts. You look at 2024 draft, he's gotten a little bit better. I'm willing to give Joe Shane the benefit of the doubt, even though I am one of the content creators that was most critical of him over the last couple of years. But I'm willing to put the mistakes in the past because if you look at the defensive side of the ball and what he's done so far, you can tell that there is an emphasis on bringing in depth. You can tell that there's an emphasis on bringing in guys that are going to be able to either play that 3-tech or play next to Dexter Lawrence. Chauncey Golston comes in. The secondary, thinking that Deonte Banks could be a guy that could be cornerback 1 last year, right? And seeing it completely fail with a rookie safety on the back end, allowing Xavier McKinney to walk. They learn from their mistakes now, and they go out there and they address the safety position, bringing in Javon Holland and bringing in the only guy that I asked the New York Giants to bring in free agency in Paulson Adebo. So I'm just hoping that Joe Shane can get it right and start getting his team in the right direction from a personnel standpoint because I'm not too worried about Brian Dable. I think if you just get the dogs in the room, then everything should fall into place from a coaching standpoint.
And that last part is what I really stick on, man. I just had my guy TP on the channel yesterday, and I've been telling a lot of people throughout this process, man, this team needs talent. Say it for what it is. This team needs talent. There's a reason why if you go past the past couple of drafts, we have players that aren't even on second contracts, players that aren't even in the league anymore at this point. When you draft talent and you take the best player available versus drafting for need, and that's like the biggest narrative going on with Giants land. We've been drafting for need, trying to make it work. You got guys that don't work out. We just need talent in this room no matter what it is. I had TP letting me know, man, like saying we need more talent. We have talent. We need more of it. We need guys that are on the back end. We need good depth. And I hate to keep bringing up this team, and it sucks to see. But overall, when you think about what the Eagles built over there, man, listen, they have talent all over the field, and they have depth at their positions. When you think about, obviously getting after the quarterback, they have a plethora of players that can do that versus for us, our depth is extremely thin, and we haven't seen players, once again, I mean, not Xavier, but Ojulari signing for $4 million to the Eagles is kind of ridiculous. But when you look at it, that we had him as a talented player for a very long time. But you already know what's going to happen when he heads over there to the Eagles. But going back to what it is for this pick and the number 3 overall pick, right? You spoke on Abdul Carter being the play. What do you see in Abdul Carter to warrant being the number 3 overall pick? Right now, you'll see it on Twitter and everyone's speaking on, hey, Myles Garrett didn't add any wins to the Browns. He's going to be a Hall of Famer. I think everyone could use a Hall of Famer. Where do you stand on Abdul Carter and what makes him worthy of the number 3 overall pick?
Yeah, the thing about Myles Garrett, real quickly, is kind of foolish because he was definitely a contributor during the playoff run, right? It goes back to what I was saying. One player is not going to impact the team the way that people want. This isn't Madden. You can't just put a 99 quarterback back there and start winning games, man. It's just not going to happen like that. But for me, with Abdul Carter, tenacity. He's got that gritty type of mentality up front that I think we don't have. Versatility. I think he's a guy that you can move around that defensive line, maybe even have him playing a little bit of off-ball linebacker. I think he's a guy that he's that great that you have to find a way to get him on the field. And, stacking up these kind of pass rushers like this, we tried it with Kayvon Thibodeau and it didn't work. And a lot of people are saying, well, if you bring in Abdul Carter, well, what happens with Kayvon Thibodeau? That right there, that lies into the problem that has been a big problem with the New York Giants in the past. And it's the depth piece, right? Like, go back to 2023, and I hate to flip it on the opposite side of the ball, right? Joe Shane, when we got to the Hard Knocks offseason, he was like, Patrick Mahomes couldn't even block, couldn't even work behind that offensive line that we wheeled out there against the Miami Dolphins, right? But why were we in that situation? It was because you paid your quarterback, but you didn't pay the guys around him. You didn't have the depth pieces around him to protect the $160 million investment. So when you lost guys like Andrew Thomas and you lost a couple of players for a few games on the interior portion of that offensive line, that is why you had nothing but scraps out there against the Miami Dolphins. So this is a depth case for me. You have to stack players. Having too many edge rushers, in what world would that be a problem? Like, for me, we've been dealing with Azeez Ojulari being the only depth piece that we've had really on the edge. And unfortunately, he's dealt with a lot of injuries. So for me, I'm okay with just taking the best player on the board, and just bringing in a guy that if you develop him properly, which has been a problem with the New York Giants over the past, but if you can develop him properly, he's going to be a guy that's going to be there for years to come, that's just going to be terrorizing quarterbacks within the division. And then go around the division. If you are a Shedeur Sanders guy, right, do you think that where is he going to lie in best case scenario as far as the quarterback rankings go within the NFC East? We still got Dak Prescott over there coming back off an injury, who's a very capable quarterback, right? One of the few quarterbacks that was drafted in the later rounds that actually worked, right? Because that story never works. We got Jaden Daniels coming off the best rookie season we've seen from a rookie in the history of the game, right? Jalen Hurts just won a Super Bowl. So for me, if I'm going to get the quarterback, I want him to be extremely elite. But more importantly, we need a guy that's going to help get after these quarterbacks, right? You talked about the Philadelphia Eagles, and Giants fans, I get it. There's a bit of spite there with the whole Philadelphia Eagles and, the rivalry or lack of a rivalry that we have had over the years. But the reason why they have all that depth up front, offensive line-wise and on the defensive line, look at their last couple of drafts. I want to say it's 15 players in the last 3 to 4 seasons that Howie Roseman has drafted within the trenches. You got Joe Shane going out here in the 2024 draft and not even addressing the trenches on either side of the ball, and it's not like he's a guy that goes after the flashy pick. He's just too busy trying to draft for need. And he's thinking, or was thinking, I'll say, that once you plug a starter there and you have a checkbox at the starter position, that you don't have to figure out who's behind that guy, right? And I think that is more important sometimes than, obviously what's going to be happening up front with the starter. And that pick 3 is cool, but in my opinion, that day 2 pick 34, is going to be one of the most important picks of this draft.
Yeah, I think you hit it right on the nail. Listen, we got 4 picks in the top 100 as well. And for people look at it, man, once again, Adam Schefter went on record talking about it, or Ian Rappaport speaking on the Eagles. This is the last time I'm bringing up the Eagles on this stream right here. They have talented players that, one, you can't pay them all, but guess what? They walk away and they get them comp picks back. I've seen a lot of people being super excited about the pick 99 that we got for Xavier McKinney. The Eagles have been doing that for a while, and it looks like they're going to continue to do that because they can't afford to pay everyone. They've been drafting, obviously, talent at those positions, but when it comes to it, same thing that we're going to have to do with Kayvon Thibodeau. If we get an Abdul Carter in here and Kayvon Thibodeau happens to see the door, whether it's via trade or whether it's leaving through free agency, you're getting some type of return back in that standpoint versus running it back and worrying about who's going to play more snaps, Kayvon Thibodeau or Abdul Carter. Listen, I think that's a good problem to have and not a bad problem to have. I feel like people are kind of a little too worried about that and instead want to, jump to what the big news is which is the quarterback position.
Yeah.
So speaking on it, what you just last said, man, obviously we know Shedeur Sanders is the quarterback is going to be talked about with the Giants. Let's put Shedeur Sanders and Cam Ward and to the side. Who do you see as the next quarterback that should be worth taking? And you hear the Giants in on a bunch of quarterbacks. You've seen Tyler Shugg with the late, workout, Jalen Milroe, Jackson Dart. Where do you stand on those quarterbacks? Who is the next quarterback we should be looking at? Because it's looking like pick 34 could be for one of those quarterbacks, or they need to vaunt themselves up back into the first round. Where do you stand on those?
Yeah, so for me, throughout the process of evaluating these quarterbacks, it has changed a little bit at times. I've got Jackson Dart as quarterback 2 right now. And that is because of the intangibles that he possesses, having a little bit of that mobility. I like the velocity on the throws. The deep ball does need a little bit of work, right? His deep ball is a little bit flat, but he can chuck it. He can throw it extremely far. I think that Dart could come into the league and he's the quarterback that more resembles what I could envision what happened with a guy like Bo Nix. If you get him in a quick passing kind of concept type of system that runs RPO, which is something that he did well at Ole Miss. And when he came there, he had never ran RPO before that, right? But he learned how to run that RPO. And there are blunders on his tape. And me having a guy like Jackson Dart at quarterback 2, it's not even there's not a large gap between him and Shedeur Sanders, like at all. I could have Shedeur Sanders there and it wouldn't even bother me. But I do think that there is a gap between all these quarterbacks and Cam Ward. Cam Ward is a guy that I would have probably had at like quarterback 4 last year. And I would have had a first round grade on him. Absolutely. But I also like you have to have the balance, in my opinion, of the intangibles, the build, and also the skill set, right? And the productivity. All these guys have great productivity coming out of college, from Jackson Dart, Shedeur Sanders, Cam Ward, and even my quarterback 4, who I'd say I'm 4 and 5 right now between Jalen Milroe and Will Howard. Like, I like Will Howard, the build, right? And I like the intangibles that he possesses from the quarterback position, but he doesn't necessarily have like the highest of ceilings, but you just never know with a guy that is that big. He's literally built like a Josh Allen. Now, I don't want to just get enamored with the build, but I do think of those quarterbacks, Jackson Dart is going to be the guy that I think would be quarterback 2 that I would be looking at next. But again, I say that pick 34 is so important. You can't part ways with that pick 34 to get a quarterback. If you deem that this class has the quarterback that you need, then you might want to just pull the trigger and get that quarterback at 3. For me, there's going to be a ton of talent on the board when we get to pick 34, which could either be D tackles, it could be wide receivers. For others, it might be running back. But for me, I'm looking at them D tackles. Like, if a guy like Kenneth Grant, let's say, were to fall to the second round at pick 34, then you got to just straight up sprint up there to the podium and run that card in. There are wide receivers that are going to be there, I think, too, like Jaden Higgins. Emeka Ibuka is going to be up there probably, maybe a Luther Burden. I know the New York Giants are not going to take a wide receiver at 34, but I would love that because, I've kind of got a little bit used to the fact that it might be a guy like Travis Hunter at 3. And just imagine what defenses would have to be scheming for with a guy like Malik Neighbors on one side and a guy like Travis Hunter on the other, or a guy like Jaden Higgins on the other side, or even a Trey Harris or somebody like that. I just think it will make this offense much more potent. Joe Shane has already done a lot of addressing to the defense, and that defense, I'm confident in that defense now from a starting perspective. But this offense is the same exact offense that we rolled out there last year minus Daniel Jones. They have 0 upgrades. They brought back Darius Slayton. They brought back Greg Van Roten, and it is literally the exact same unit. So if you want different results, I think you're going to have to tap into some different players. I like the value. That's the other thing I wanted to make a point on. When I think about a Will Howard in the, let's say at pick 105 versus a Jackson Dart or a Shedeur Sanders at pick 3 or pick 34, the value for me is better in the later rounds. And another guy that nobody's talking about that I think is just as good as every one of these quarterbacks in this class is Curtis Rourke. And, he played the entire year on a torn ACL, and he didn't miss a game. And he put up like 29 tutties. He primarily played from the pocket. Very accurate quarterback. Anticipation better than most of the quarterbacks in this draft. But he had the ACL surgery at the end of the year, so not a lot of people are talking about him. But honestly, if I had it my way and I could think of a ideal 2025 NFL draft for me, I probably wouldn't get a quarterback until day 3, and it would probably be a guy like Curtis Rourke or maybe a guy like Will Howard.
That's what I'm feeling as well. You said it right in the beginning of it. If you want the quarterback, I think you should just take him, and especially if it's a Shedeur Sanders, right? Like, people are talking about Giants trading back into the first round to get Shedeur Sanders. How sure can you be if you feel that conviction that you want to trade up for him? If you like him, you take him at 3. I mean, everyone's been going on and on about all the homework they've been doing, all the visits, all the workouts that they've hosted with Shedeur Sanders, and they've done the most homework than other teams. I mean, if you like the guy that much, you take him at 3. I don't think they risk it to try to see if they can trade back up into the first. But I mean, all that smoke screen is going to be there. A quarterback that you didn't really speak too much on, and I'm going to have to ask because he was up there speaking with Kay Adams, I think yesterday or a couple of days ago. Jalen Milroe talking about Malik Neighbors potentially wanting to team up with him. Where do you stand on Milroe? And I know you have him probably as your QB4, QB5. I think a lot of people are just really excited about seeing one, he's an athletic freak at the quarterback position. I think passing the ball is kind of his opportunity. And that's the most important thing when you are a quarterback. Yeah. Where do you stand on that? Is that a quarterback that should fit with Brian Daboll, judging how much he liked to run Daniel Jones previously? And what does Jalen Milroe look like in this draft? Is he gone before the end of the first round? That's what I'm seeing right now. Where do you stand on that?
I like what you brought up about does he fit Brian Daboll's scheme? And I think that if you look at the recent history of Brian Daboll with the New York Giants, you would think that Jalen Milroe could fit that scheme really well, like what we did in 2022, right? A lot of read option, RPO, boot, design quarterback runs, all that stuff to be able to get your quarterback out in space. I mean, they were even running quarterback powers with Daniel Jones, right? You could do all that with Jalen Milroe. But, what I've been doing as of late is I've been going back and looking at some tape from Brian Daboll during his Buffalo Bills days. And if you look at some of those concepts, they stretched the field. Their whole thing was drop back and throw the ball. You can remember some of those years where Josh Allen really didn't even have a running game to support what he was doing. He was the running game. So I think that, a guy like Brian Daboll needs that unicorn kind of a quarterback, at least a guy that possesses those skills to be able to buy time, to be able to, threaten the safeties down the field, take advantage of when you see, middle of the field closed type of scenarios and be able to hit those hole shots where you got the, wide receiver streaking down one of the sidelines and whatnot. I don't know if Milroe possesses that quite yet. The running capability is very intriguing because he's probably the best running quarterback that we've seen come out in a long time. I won't make some of the cliche comparisons to Lamar Jackson because we just, everybody was, taking a number 2 on Lamar Jackson during the 2018 draft right now. Yeah. And when in hindsight, they want to be like, oh, Jalen Milroe's this guy. Like, Jalen Milroe can run with the best of them. So that is intriguing. But recent history, I think, has a lot of people pumping the brakes, right? Because we saw Anthony Richardson, a quarterback in Florida that had a lot of success with his legs, didn't play a ton of games when he was over there. And NFL teams probably were thinking, like, if I get this guy in the locker room, all I got to do is iron out the deficiencies in his accuracy, his footwork, the timing, playing within structure, and all those things. All of those apply to a Jalen Milroe. And I think that seeing the way that Anthony Richardson is struggling, I mean, this guy had a 47% completion percentage this past year, right? And that is not, that's just not, it's unacceptable in the NFL to not be able to throw for over 50% completion percentage. So I think people are kind of looking at those later running situations, Anthony Richardson being one of them, and kind of placing those stigmas on a guy like Jalen Milroe. For me, I'm not drafting him in the first round. I'm not drafting them in the second round. I think that the third round is the sweet spot for a lot of these quarterbacks. And like I said, there's not a large gap between a lot of them because some of them possess a better skill set than others. A guy not being talked about either is Dylan Gabriel. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the way that the ball just comes out of his hands velocity-wise, he throws the ball better than almost every quarterback in this class, in my opinion, not named Cam Ward. Cam Ward, from an arm talent standpoint, is leaps and bounds above everybody else. But the knock on him is the dude's like 5'9". So, he's going to probably have trouble operating from the pocket, although his tape doesn't necessarily say that. Milroe, the intermediate throws and all that stuff kind of gives him some issues, right? He's not a guy that's running a system where he's having to go through progressions or do any of that. It's more of like a one read, get the hell up out of there type of vibe. Same thing with Jackson Dart, too, to be honest. Like, a lot of his reads are, hey, we're doing one concept, 2-man concept here. And if it's not there, take off and run. We've seen that a ton on his tape as well, too. Shedeur Sanders has the consistency from the quarterback position. But then if you're enamored with the mobility of a quarterback, well, Shedeur Sanders doesn't have that. You got guys that are like just Joe Schmo defensive linemen chasing him down from the backside, right? That just happens to him. So I put all those quarterbacks in one category, to be honest. And to me, they're all day 2, day 3 type of guys. And at the end of the day, I think that all of these quarterbacks have a chance to have success in the NFL. But all of them won't. We know that. You look at the history of all these drafts, day 2, day 3 guys they just normally don't pan out. And when you look at, recent history, Jalen Hurts is probably the best success story of a quarterback that was taken in the second round in the recent history. I mean, we've seen guys that just, flame out of the league extremely quick. And when you look at I think that was Kenny Pickett was the 2022 draft. It's just Brock Purdy from that draft. That's really the only guy. So, just getting a quarterback on day 2 and day 3, if you go by the odds, it's not going to give you a great chance to get one. So maybe you just pass up on all these guys.
Yeah, I think that's going to end up being the play, honestly. I've even seen mock drafts where Tyler Shugg is being taken with a 34 overall pick, and I'm letting you know right now, man, if we have that second round pick is almost pretty much a first round pick when you look at it, man. So it's so crucial that we end up hitting on that pick and adding a premier player or a player that's going to make a difference on this team. So thinking about Jalen Milroe potentially being the pick, or even talking about the other quarterbacks that you spoke on, man. Listen, this draft is so interesting, but we're gonna see what happens when it comes to the day of the draft. I even go back to, I think it was the same class as Kenny Pickett, quarterback taken by the Titans.
Yeah, Malik Willis.
Malik
Third round.
Willis. That draft, he was supposed to go in the first round, and you saw what ended up happening from there. So I think a lot of the narratives that you're seeing pushing around right now, we're going to see the truth when it comes to Thursday and even beyond Thursday on a Friday. Listen,
I like Malik Willis, bro. I'm a fan of Malik Willis, and they only gave him 2 starts in Tennessee, and they were ugly. Don't get me wrong, but when he got to the Packers and Jordan Love ended up going out with that injury, and he filled in for those 2 games. He was a guy that I was like, man, when the Titans were talking about releasing him, I was like, if you could just scoop that guy up, go get him. He's a developmental quarterback. He's almost like what you're looking at with a Joe Milton, right? It's like everyone's clamoring for a Joe Milton now after a couple of good starts. The rhetoric around Malik Willis wasn't really the same. So, I mean, if you're going to take a project quarterback, there are a bunch of them guys that are on teams right now that might not ever get the opportunity to even play. Hendon Hooker comes to mind, too.
Yeah, Hendon Hooker was definitely a big topic. And listen, I mean, I completely forgot Joe Milton's out there in Dallas. That Thanksgiving game with Joe Milton torching up the Giants is definitely going to be interesting to see. Listen, we had a lot of mock trades going on in the chat that I peeped on, man. We're going to be taking questions shortly. So if you want to ask my guy Awthentik any questions, definitely pop in with some questions right now. Now, looking at it for what the Giants can do, right? Listen, Joe Schoen, something that he's done every single offseason, every single year so far, is that he's made some type of splash or some type of trade heading into the draft night, right? I don't expect a trade to break today, but I mean, if it was, you're hearing Kayvon Thibodeau's name get thrown around. You're hearing about Evan Neal or potentially Jalen Hyatt. I don't really want to talk about those 2 players. Where do you stand on with Kayvon Thibodeau or via Joe Schoen making a trade on draft night to potentially trade back up? What do you think the odds of that are happening? And if it were to, if you were to be a betting man, do you think we see one go down on draft sometime during the draft period, day 1, day 2, day 3?
Yeah. As far as the bet, right, I wouldn't put my money on it because it takes 2 to tango, right? Now, if the New York Giants could leave Thursday night and have 2 picks, I will be ecstatic as a fan. The fan of me will be very happy about that, to be able to, especially if they can keep pick 34. Get a quarterback somewhere, in the late first round, and then also get a guy like an Abdul Carter, or if, the Cleveland Browns pass up on Hunter, you take Hunter. So I'd be totally cool with trading back into the first round. But, Joe Schoen's moves in the first 2 seasons are very alarming. And I still think that some of the positions that he has spent a lot of capital on and traded up for are still positions of need. And we noticed that coming into the year. Deonte Banks was one of the trades that happened where we traded up, and we ended up getting Deonte Banks. And you still have, after Joe Schoen spent most of his draft picks, I think the position that we have drafted the most since Joe Schoen has been here has been defensive back. And that secondary coming into the 2025 free agency was looking absolutely pathetic, right? He now has addressed that. You look at the Darren Waller situation. After drafting Daniel Bellinger in 2022, a guy who hit the ground running, kind of looked a lot like Theo Johnson did in 2024. They kind of took the legs out from underneath the table on him, and they bring in Darren Waller, who they knew was going to retire. And then you draft Theo Johnson in the 4th round in 2024. So you're addressing tight end over and over and over and over again. You're addressing cornerback and defensive back over and over and over and over again. We need to get the results out of those positions. As it goes for Kayvon Thibodeau, like I said before, I understand that he was a top 5 pick, right? And the expectation for a guy like that is, man, if he's not Aiden Hutchinson, then he's a failure. And a lot of people look at Kayvon Thibodeau today as a failure. But in my eyes, he's still a good player. He doesn't do some of the things that we wanted him to do to live up to the capital of the 5th overall selection, right? But at the end of the day, you got to stack those type of players. You got to keep those kind of players on your roster. And I think with Kayvon Thibodeau, there has to be an honest conversation and evaluation of his game when it comes time for him to either, which is it's right around the corner, man. We're talking about the 5th-year option coming up here real soon. Yeah. And then also if he's going to be re-signed. Just need to have an honest conversation, man. Like, 1, do you want to be a New York Giant? 2, we know the kind of player that you are. We see what your deficiencies are in your game. You don't have a true bull rush. You lack strength when it comes to stopping the run. You and along with Brian Burns, both are speed edge rushers that like to hit the outside and leave an opening there for a little bit of zone runs that'll go right at you. And smart teams will take advantage of that and run right at a Kayvon Thibodeau. So, my thing is, do you want to be a part of winning? And there's 2 ways to look at that. You can look at the New York Giants and go, well, they're not doing a lot of winning here, man. Trade me, get me on the market right now. Or you could look at it from a loyalty perspective and saying, like, look, I want to be here from when we started from the mud and be a part of this culture as we grow and develop this team. And I do think that Joe Shane is getting this team in the right direction from a defensive standpoint. Now, I'm not a huge fan of Joe Shane thus far, but
Mhm.
this past year is looking pretty good. When we looked at the roster entering free agency, I posted it on my Twitter page. I made a graphic about it. People were telling me, man, like, yo, like that graphic's causing an ulcer for me, bro. I'm about to have a heart attack at how horrible that roster looks that had 0 quarterbacks on it entering the year. And quite frankly, our linebacker core was probably our best core. So, I want to feed into that. Like, if the New York Giants want to get back to being a dominant pass rush type of team, we'll feed into that. We're not going to do that. We know that we are not going to do that with just Kayvon Thibodeau and Brian Burns on the outside. I've even seen where teams are willing to just run the rock right at Dexter Lawrence because they know that they can double team him. I was front and center at the Washington Commanders game last year, week 2, and I was sitting there scratching my head like, wait a minute. They're running with Brian Robinson right down the A-gap. Like, how is this happening? Well, you don't got nobody playing 3-tech next to Dexter Lawrence that's, truly a caliber of an NFL starter. So they're just double teaming him and then parting the season, running right down the teeth of the defense for the New York Giants. So for me, I wouldn't trade Kayvon Thibodeau. And also the points that you made about, the comp picks. Like, keep him on the roster, man. I don't know about the 5th-year option. You're going to have to pay like $16.5, $17 million for Kayvon Thibodeau. I'd have to look at how that aligns against the other edge rushers in the market, but just off the top, doesn't seem like a great idea.
Yeah, I mean, even speaking on that, like, I'm down to trade Kayvon Thibodeau not this year, but next year. You pick up that option if he has a good year, even if he doesn't have the greatest year, trying to get some type of something back. But the biggest thing is that Joe Shane has no history of doing that yet. Azeez Ojulari was a candidate. Darius Slayton was a candidate. Saquon was a candidate. You can go on and on about a couple players. The only one he truly got rid of, the only truly player he got rid of was Leonard Williams for that 2nd-round pick, which I would say making that move, I would do that move again. But you just don't see him do it often enough. So it's hard to really bank on that. If you have Kayvon for this roster for a year, and obviously on the expiring contract, are you able to move off of him? It's hard to see. Yeah. Listen, it's been centered around quarterback talk. It's been centered around the number 3 overall pick. You've been doing a lot of homework, man. I just got to ask you, who are you intrigued by outside of a Travis Hunter, Abdul Carter, and quarterbacks aside? Who are you intrigued by, throughout this draft? And who do you want the Giants to potentially, who can you see the Giants taking out of that bunch?
Love the question. So let's kind of just go by days, I guess, of the draft. So for me at 34, love a lot of the defensive tackles. Darius Alexander out of Toledo is a guy that I think it might be a little early there, but I would totally draft him there. I like Tyleik Williams out of Ohio State, a good run stuffer. Derek Harmon out of Oregon's a guy that, has the build, a guy that has the productivity, has the numbers, the pressure rate, all of that stuff, projected to go in the 1st round. If he's there at 34, of all those guys I named, I think that he'd be the guy that I would absolutely go get. Kenneth Grant, we talked about him from Michigan. I think he has the potential to possibly be better than Mason Graham, to be honest. So love the D tackle class. I got my board over here. Let me just see if there's anybody I might be missing. A late round guy, Jordan Phillips out of Maryland. I kind of like Jordan Phillips as far as a run stuffer, and I like TJ Sanders. I don't think Walter Nolan's going to fall. So that's really all the guys I would think. Oh, and if we don't get a D tackle in round 2 or 3, I think the guy that'll still be there when we go to pick with our 2nd, 3rd round pick is Aeneas Peebles out of Virginia Tech. A little bit undersized, smaller type of 3-tech defensive tackle. Best spin move in this entire draft. He can get to the quarterback. He's got that gritty, type of characteristics to his game. So that's D tackle for me. Wide receivers, I named a few. I'm absolutely in love with Jaden Higgins. If there's a receiver that I would love to see fall to us, it would be Jaden Higgins. I like the leaner bodies, the taller, bigger stature type of dudes. Trey Harris would be another guy that I'd be looking into. If we go later rounds, I like Kyle Williams. Who else we got here? Jalen Noel would be a nice guy to bring in, but, we do have slot kind of shored up.
Yep.
Emeka's another dude. Luther we talked about. Tedero McMillan is my wide receiver 1 in this draft. I think he's going to be a great player. I like Ricky White III out of UNLV. He's an undersized X wide receiver with a lot of speed. He's another guy that I would get day 3 possibly. And even some guys that might fall all the way to the 7th round. We got 2 7th-round picks, and I think a guy that might be there if we don't get a wide receiver early on. Jackson Meeks out of Syracuse. Was not invited to the combine. Had the numbers like 8, 9 touchdowns, 1,000 yards on the year. Kyle McCord was definitely lighting it up with him. So I like those wide receivers. Running back is a position I want to address in this draft as well. A lot of people talking about, obviously, Ashton Genty, Omarion Hampton, who I think is a little, he's a great running back, but I think the 1st-round hype is a little bit overrated, in my opinion. Doesn't really have that home run speed that a lot of people are advertising, but can do a lot of the stuff between the tackles. It's funny that the Hampton name, I'm a Giants fan from like late 80s into the 90s. And Rodney Hampton was like one of the first jerseys I had. So when I hear that Hampton name, I'm almost reluctant to be like, man, maybe we should draft him. But I like him, just not a first-round grade on him. Ideally, the running back I want to leave the draft with is R.J. Harvey. I think he's got a great skill set to compare with Tyrone Tracy. And if you look at Tyrone Tracy and the productivity, and granted, it was just his rookie year, but when he had a running quarterback in the lineup in Daniel Jones for the first 10 weeks of the season, he had 3 100-yard games. Daniel Jones got released. Tyrone Tracy never had a 100-yard game after that. The yards per carry dipped. So I'm looking for a elusive running back that can pay dividends in the passing game as well. So I like R.J. Harvey a lot, but like I think it'll be a little bit early to pull, the trigger on a guy like R.J. Harvey. So for me, 5th round, Brashard Smith out of SMU. Just all you got to do is go look at the highlights. You only got to go look at all 22. If you're not familiar with Brashard Smith, just go look at some highlights. Home run hitter. I think he had the 3rd fastest 40 of all the running backs at the combine. Has the speed. He was a former wide receiver that played ball at Miami, so he can catch the ball out of the backfield. I think you could pair him up with a guy like Tyrone Tracy that can do some of the every down running back stuff until you really bring in a premier running back. Love Brashard Smith. Bashal Tootin out of Virginia Tech's another running back I got my eyes on as well. If we were to go with like some bigger stature guys, I like Damian Martinez out of Miami. I like Ollie Gordon as well out of Oklahoma State. But I definitely think they got to leave this draft with a running back. Can't address tight end again. We've done that for 3 straight years in a row. I see somebody in the chat talking about Caleb Johnson. I'm a fan of Caleb Johnson. He's not a flashy running back. I got to see him in person when they played Maryland at Maryland. I shoot content for Maryland's football team, so I got to see him in person. And I'll tell you what was surprising about Caleb Johnson, at least during that game, and I have looked at his tape, but during that game, from the sidelines, it looked like he rushed for about 70, 75 yards. Look up at the box score. This man put up like 160. He's the kind of guy that's just going to get you 5 to 7 to 8 every time. And then he does have that ability to get those big runs down the field. The reason why I'm very intrigued with R.J. Harvey, if you look at the total number of explosive runs from running backs in college last year, and you look at the percentage of runs over 10 yards, R.J. Harvey led by a mile. 22%. I want to say just over 22% of his runs were 10 yards or more. The next closest guy was Travion Henderson, who I think is going to be a fantastic running back in this league. And if teams allow him to fall in this draft, they're foolish. He's one of the better pass blocking running backs as well. He can do it all between the tackles, and he has that capability to hit the home runs. But Travion was the next running back when you're talking about explosive runs over 10 yards. And when you talk about explosive runs over 15 yards, R.J. Harvey dominates. So you're looking at a guy that a quarter of his runs were over 10 yards. A lot of people don't like the smaller stature running backs, but for me, I think he's going to be very capable to come into this league, do things kind of like a Bucky Irving did between the tackles, but also be able to hit the home run, down the field and be able to get those big plays. I'm trying to think about other positions. Edge-wise, I don't want to address edge early. There are some guys like later rounds that I'm kind of keeping my eyes on. I like Savion Jones out of LSU. Definitely not on board for the Landon Jackson stuff. I know he's a big body, not on board with Landon Jackson. I like Jack Sawyer a little bit. There's a couple late round guys, like 7th round, Jimmy Horn Jr., maybe a wide receiver still there. I'd go for a guy like Jimmy Horn, but those are the positions I'm addressing, if I'm Joe Shane. I'm kind of not as worried about cornerback as much now that we brought in Paulson Adebo, but there were definitely some guys I was looking at before we brought him in, and Trey Amos and Kobe Bryant. Depending on where Kobe Bryant falls, I'd be willing to draft him. I think he's a guy that has the upside and has the speed and size to be able to play in this league.
And some might hear that and say, why draft a corner? We just signed a corner. Listen, we need depth. We need depth. That's what we've been echoing this whole time. You're still going to draft for that position and get guys on here. Listen, you heard a lot of insight on this last little rant. Shout out to you, Awthentik. And definitely, if you're new, if you haven't seen them, go ahead and hit the link in the bio. I did put your channel down in the description.
Salute.
Make sure you subscribe over there. Listen, RJ Harvey too. I reside in Central Florida. I saw him play against Colorado when they came down here. Listen, Colorado completely stumped their offense because they have a lackluster quarterback. But RJ Harvey had a crazy play that went for about 70 yards on there. So I know exactly about that explosive you're talking about. And I think continuing to add on to that running back room, listen, there should be no shame in our game in adding that. Some may argue, hey, we still have Devin Singletary on this team. that shouldn't be even a topic of conversation. And
At all.
I think it's very it's funny how it turned out, letting Saquon walk, signing a Devin Singletary, and then now here we are talking about drafting another running back, but that's how it should be, especially with how thorough this draft is and how we need playmakers on this team. Like,
Yep.
I think people kind of just are sleeping on that fact and just saying, hey, we have elite neighbors. Why are we drafting a wide receiver? We had the worst offense in the league last year. Quarterback is not going to completely flip this team altogether. And even speaking on a couple other teams, unless some might say if you have Washington's rookie quarterback or such, you might see that type of switch happen. We have a couple of questions saying if you want to address center, is that a need that you're thinking what we're going to do? Drafting a kicker might be in play. Maybe one that doesn't have a pulled hammy or groin or whatever it is. But when you talk on the trenches real quick, do you see that being a position that we kind of add on?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to get some guys in the trenches. I'm glad y'all brought that up because there's somebody I kind of forgot to speak about. Not necessarily at the center position, but a versatile offensive lineman out of Ohio State, man. Donovan Jackson. He's a guy that if he were to fall to 34, I would be willing to draft him there as well. When it comes to centers, I'd say there's one guy I've got my eyes on in the late rounds, and that's Jonah Monheim out of USC. Yeah. I'm looking for versatile linemen, and I know that might scare a lot of New York Giants fans, seeing the things that transpired during the Bobby Johnson era where he was kind of trying to move people along that offensive line, and people were like, just stick them at a certain position and whatnot. But I want versatile players, and Jonah Monheim, he's played every position on the offensive line from center to guard to tackle. I'm not. I want to say the verdict is not out on JMS yet, but man, he's been getting bullied the last couple of years. He's got to bulk up, he's got to get bigger, he's got to get stronger. But I'm not one of the thinking that you have to have like A+ players at every position on the offensive line. I know, New York Giants fans are conditioning as far as offensive line has been conditioned, right? It's like we've been so bad on the line when Andrew Thomas goes out. People are like, just go out there and draft 10 new linemen, right? I remember people saying that a couple of years ago. But I do think that this offensive line, especially when healthy, is much better than what people think. And once you get a decisive quarterback behind this offensive line, which I do think Russell Wilson still is at this point in his career, people will see that this offensive line is much better than it is advertised to be. So I do want to address offensive line. If guys like Gray Zabel at the guard position fall, or Donovan Jackson, some of the premier talent on the interior portion of the line fall, I'd be willing to draft those guys. And like I said, Jonah Monheim late in the draft would be a guy I'd be definitely intrigued about drafting.
Yeah, I think you touched on it too, talking about the offensive line. I definitely think, people are saying we got Evan Neal at guard, don't take a guard. Banking on Evan Neal to be a starting guard for this team, it's going to be a recipe for disaster. I know we brought back Greg Van Roten, but definitely you should see us continue to add at those positions and truly just add more talent and competition when it comes to that. Listen, I got one more question for you, man. Overall, 1 year of Russell Wilson. I think some people are kind of undervaluing what he can bring to this team and what he should be. He's been the quarterback that I wanted from the beginning of free agency. I didn't really expect the order of Jameis Winston and then Russell Wilson, but he was kind of the quarterback that I've been leaning on and just saying, even if we do bring a rookie quarterback in here, I would love for him to be in the same room as Russell Wilson, learn from a guy like Russell Wilson, not really teach on it. And I love that he even spoke on it. Listen, it's not a situation where the quarterback is grabbing the rookie's quarterback's hand and kind of teaching him one by one. You can learn just by being in the presence of him. What are you expecting out of Russell Wilson in 1 year in a New York Giants uniform? I don't expect it to really pass this year. But what are you expecting out of him this upcoming year? And the biggest differences you'll see from having a Daniel Jones, a Tommy DeVito last year, and Drew Lock compared to this year?
Love that question, because that is a very hard thing to gauge, right? Like, how much better is Russell Wilson going to be than Daniel Jones? I will say this. Russell Wilson is going to bring the consistency to the table, and that has always been the problem with Daniel Jones playing quarterback for the Giants, right? You look at the Browns game, pretty decent game. You look at the Seahawks game, pretty decent game, and then he'll randomly just fall apart in the game against whatever team, right?
Yep.
I've looked at all of Russell Wilson snaps from the last 2 seasons, 2024 with the Pittsburgh Steelers, 2023 with the Broncos. Some of the tape in 2023 is actually a lot better than what you saw with the Steelers. Now, Russell was consistent. It was very average and consistent in that same realm. A lot of people think he fell apart in the last 5 games of the season, right, including that playoff game against the Baltimore Ravens. But you got to look at that superior type of competition that he was going up against, right? Going up against the Philadelphia Eagles, going up against the Baltimore Ravens twice, going up against the Cincinnati Bengals as well, and going up against the Kansas City Chiefs. There aren't many quarterbacks that you're going to put out there that are going to have success against that string of teams, one. Two, the defense kind of fell apart on him as well. In those last 5 games, that defense went from allowing 19 points per game to allowing 27 points per game. And Russell just couldn't climb out of those holes. You saw it in the playoff game. They got down like 14 or 21-0, 21-7. And even though you look at the box score and the statistics from Russell Wilson still look pretty decent, still not enough to win that game. Throwing across the middle has been a issue with Russell Wilson over the last couple of years. Maybe the stature has, something to do with that. But when we're talking about on the outside where he lives and dies, he is definitely still one of the upper echelon type of quarterbacks in this league when we're talking about some of the stuff that guys like Darius Slayton do very well and guys like Malik Neighbors. If you look at what Malik Neighbors was doing last year to set up what the attempt at some of the big plays, it was a lot of timing routes, right? 10-yard comebacks, 5-yard outs, the backside digs, things like that. I do think that Russell Wilson excels at those. If you look at Darius Slayton, he excels at the similar type of routes as well. The timing should be much better this year. I'm eager to see what Brian Daboll can dial up for a guy like Russell Wilson. And I also think that people are sleeping on his mobility. Russell Wilson is a guy that can get out of the pocket to make the big play. And the one thing that everybody knows is the deep ball, it's still there. And I look at George Pickens as a bit of Malik Neighbors light. So now you're looking at bringing in Russell Wilson into a locker room that has a wide receiver that is possibly a top 5 guy when all said and done. I think they're going to eat this year, and I think you'll see that Malik Neighbors will be getting the ball down the field a lot more. We didn't get a chance to see that with Daniel Jones. I'm praying to God that Brian Daboll finds a way to move Malik Neighbors around a little bit more too and kind of shift him into the slot to be able to do some of the things that he excelled at when he was at LSU with Jaden Daniels, which is the slot fade. The play that a lot of Giants fans made fun of when Brian Daboll sat down with Jaden Daniels on the whiteboard, and Jaden Daniels said, Brian Daboll asked him, well, what do you do in this instance? And he said, I throw the touchdown. People think that was lack of experience, but it was his play that he was drawing up.
Yeah.
LSU ate off that play all year long. If you go back and you look at Malik's tape or you look at Jaden Daniels' tape, it's nothing but slot fades. So I'd love to see the Giants put themselves in situations where we're looking at single high, middle of the field closed, and be able to, exploit and utilize some of that speed that we have on the outside with guys like Darius Slayton. And crossing my fingers, bro, that we can find a way to use Jalen Hyatt in this lineup too and be able to use his speed on the field as well. But I think Russell Wilson should be a guy that, should be hovering around. If I had to do a quick, statistical estimation, I think we'll finally get a quarterback that will throw over 25 touchdowns, and I think, there'll be some mistakes there, like the fumble we saw with Russell Wilson in the Ravens game where he ran down the field like 40 yards and just said, here, you guys can have it. Or some of the interceptions that you've seen on his tape late in games as well. There'll be some mistakes, but I think we're willing to be able to, accept that as long as it comes with victories. And I think that Russell Wilson is going to put this team in a good position to be able to win games this year.
I completely agree with that sentiment. And listen, I would love, like you were touching on Malik Neighbors, man. I think Malik Neighbors is special, and seeing what he did last year. I love the way Brian Daboll was using him in the first half. It seemed after that concussion, he just wasn't the same. And even the way they were using him and targeting him just wasn't the same. You've seen the conversations where Malik's like, I don't call the plays and all that such. Listen, we need to keep this guy in here. And hopefully, I think Russell Wilson and Malik Neighbors for a year can put up with crazy numbers. And I think we'll see a lot more of an explosive offense. That's my hope. But once again, man, appreciate you for jumping on here and spending a lot of game. Listen, everyone that's in the chat right now, everyone that's watching this, a lot of the names that you heard today will be, you'll hear the name called on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. So definitely be looking for that insight. We appreciate it over here, man. Go ahead and let the people know where can they find you and what should they expect over on your channels.
Absolutely. So I'm 3 days a week right now on Bleacher Report. That might ramp up to 4 days a week during the season, but for the entire offseason, I've been 3 days a week. I'm actually going to be live today at 6 p.m. over there with Bleacher Report. Just kind of talking about the draft countdown and whatnot, some of the things we talked about today. And also, I got a YouTube channel, which is really the foundation of everything that I do. And the reason why I'm getting, the opportunities to talk ball for a living right now. The channel's called Awthentik and the Beard. It's the best way to describe this. So the theme of the channel is the best division in football. So we cover the NFC East throughout the season, 4 days a week. We do 4 live streams a week. But it is very New York Giants centric and Washington Commander centric. I live in the DMV. I just actually moved outside of DC. I was in DC for like 10 years, and I moved right outside of DC here to Silver Spring, Maryland. So my buddy, who's my co-host, is a Commanders fan. I'm a Giants fan. So I will say this: our content in layers is very different than anything else you're going to see from any of the other content creators in the Giants realm. So what we do is we cover the division. and not just our teams. Like, I'm very well versed about the Philadelphia Eagles, very well versed about the Dallas Cowboys as well. And also, what I'm trying to bring to the table here is more of a documentary, cinematography type of landscape fused with what we're doing with football. So a lot of the content that I've been working on as of late has a very docu-series type of feel to it. I just released a draft video on Monday that kind of just gives my thoughts that, kind of what we talked about today on the quarterback and pick 3 and things like that. And I'll be continuing that docu-series throughout the entire season. And a ton of resources. My whole thing about my channel is I want to bring value to the Giants community and the football community in general. So I'm all about giving resources. If you go to my page, you're going to see compilations of the quarterbacks through the games where you don't have to watch an entire Shedeur Sanders game. You can turn on his tape versus Nebraska, and I'll have a compilation of all of his throws, all of his dropbacks, all in a sequential order, so you can watch the whole entire game from the quarterback perspective within a 5 to 10 minute span. I got all the scoring drives from Russell Wilson's 2024 season and his 2023 season on there. I like to highlight a lot of all 22 on my channel, and not from a perspective of X's and O's, because in my opinion, most people that are fans of a football team truly have no clue what the hell is going on a football field from an X's and O's standpoint. They don't even know the terminology. They don't know the concepts. They don't know the schemes. So, I try to watch all 22 and learn, along with my fan base, because I'm not a content creator that comes up here and thinks that I'm above anybody else or anything like that. My whole thing is to try to bring quality and to try to bring value. And that is what we do. And we're very consistent. Another thing is consistency over there. Like I said, 4 days a week during the season, 3 days a week on Bleacher Report. So fuse that together. You're getting 7 streams from me, throughout the week of an NFL season. So that's what I do. I'm trying to bring, just more of that cinematography to the table. I'm an aspiring cinematographer myself. I've got a resume of a bunch of stuff that I've already done in the music world that I'm kind of trying to transfer into the cinematography world, as I got a couple of opportunities over the past couple of years to do some sound for some big films. So just trying to fuse those worlds of all the things that I love. I've always been a guy that, tries to create my livelihood off things that I'm passionate about and things that I love. I've not worked a 9 to 5 in like over 12 to 13 years. So I'm all about like taking the passions and finding a way to be able to create a livelihood off of them while bringing that value. And that's what we do over at Awthentik and the Beard. Big shout out to my co-host, the Beard over there, man. He does a lot of great things with the Commanders as well. And salute to you for having me today, man. This was a good conversation. And I like when I can hop on a channel and the quality is right there. You know what I mean? Like from a
Come on now.
production standpoint, and just from being concise with your thoughts and well-spoken and stuff like that, man. So salute to you, man. It was my pleasure today rocking out with you today and talking New York Giants ball.
Appreciate you, man. Once again, everyone that wants to go subscribe to Awthentik and the Beard, link is in the description. Go ahead on over there. He's going to be live today at 6 p.m. And reminder, everyone that's in the chat right now, 7:30 p.m. Eastern time, Thursday night, we will be live covering night 1. So make sure you tune in on that. Shout out to everyone in the chat right now. Shout out Awthentik in the building, man. And we will catch y'all on the next one.